Belgium, December 1944. On the frozen edge of the Ardennes, a pale winter sun clawed weakly through slate-gray clouds as the 99th Infantry Division dug into a ridgeline overlooking a narrow, forest-choked valley. Snowflakes drifted lazily at first, then more urgently, blown sideways by the cold breath of an approaching storm. In a shallow foxhole barely wider than a coffin, Private Daniel Hartley, 21 years old, crouched with his chin tucked into the collar of his field jacket. He was a quiet one in the platoon, the one who always scribbled sketches in the margins of his maps, the one who jury-rigged solutions to problems nobody else even noticed existed. And today, he wore the thing the unit had mocked for 3 days straight, a helmet liner wrapped in layered, water-soaked field map paper, molded and dried into a stiff shell beneath his M1 steel pot. They called it Hartley's paper helmet. To them it was funny, pointless, another oddball idea from the weird kid who liked tinkering. Sergeant Keller had laughed loudest. Paper, Hartley? Paper? What's next? Sandbags made of newspapers. Armor made of mail-order catalogs. Even Hartley had smiled at that. It did sound ridiculous. Paper didn't stop bullets. It didn't stop shrapnel. It didn't stop anything. Except Hartley knew something the others didn't. Wet paper. Layered, compressed, and dried. Turned rigid. Thick enough, it acted like primitive laminate. And laminate didn't need to stop a shell fragment. It only needed to slow it enough for the steel pot to handle the rest. He never claimed it was a miracle shield, just a margin of survival. A few millimeters more between him and the worst that artillery could throw at him. He never expected to prove it. But at 10:42 a.m., a low, rumbling whump rolled across the valley. Then another, and another. The Germans had found their range. Keller's head snapped up. Incoming. Get down. The first shells hit the opposite ridge, exploding in violent pillars of mud, snow, and shattered trees. The next salvo fell closer, too close. The air filled with a mechanical shriek of steel fragments cutting through branches like invisible razors. Private Boone shouted over the rising roar. 6-hour creeping barrage. They're softening the whole sector. Hartley pressed himself deeper into the frozen mud. Snow rained down from the blast waves. The earth trembled. Shrapnel hissed through the trees like angry hornets. Boone yelled toward Hartley, "Hope that paper helmet of yours can pray for US now." But as the third salvo landed, the one that walked directly onto their position, a razor-edged fragment the size of a thumb hit Hartley's helmet with a brutal metallic crack, punching into the steel shell hard enough to dent it inward. The blast knocked him to his side. His ears rang. Snow filled his mouth. But he was alive, and when he touched the dented helmet, he felt the pulped, compressed paper layers that had absorbed just enough of the fragment's energy to keep it from entering his skull. When Sergeant Keller saw it, his expression collapsed from mockery into stunned disbelief. The barrage was only beginning. Hartley still had 5 hours and 50 minutes to survive under one of the heaviest sustained bombardments the Ardennes would see. And with every new blast, the platoon would realize the same truth. That ridiculous paper helmet, the one everyone mockingly called a joke, was about to save far more than just Hartley's life. The fourth salvo hit so close that the concussion lifted dirt from the floor of the foxhole and rained it back down like dry, gritty snow. Tree trunks splintered above the men, sending jagged shards spinning like wooden shrapnel. The ground bucked again. Another shell, even closer. Then another. The barrage wasn't random. It was a rolling pattern, methodical and precise. The Germans were walking their artillery directly through the American defensive line. Sergeant Keller slammed his back against the foxhole wall as a fountain of mud erupted just yards away. His voice was almost drowned out by the thunder overhead. "They're zeroing us. Keep your heads down." Hartley pressed his helmet deeper into the earth, feeling the crushed paper laminate shift slightly under the steel as it absorbed vibration. Boone clutched his rifle to his chest. "They're going to bury us alive. They'll turn this whole ridge into a crater." Keller snapped, "Shut it. Save your breath." But fear was contagious, and the shrieking howl of incoming shells only fed it. The barrage tightens. A high-pitched whistle tore through the sky. Hartley recognized it instantly. Airburst, he shouted. The shell detonated above the foxholes, raining molten steel fragments downward like a metallic sleet storm. Pieces hammered against the helmets and shoulders of the squad. Several men screamed as hot shards tore into exposed skin. One fragment hit Hartley's helmet dead-on with a violent ping, a sharper, higher sound than before. He felt the jolt strike the paper layer, compressing it like a shock absorber. Boone stared at him, eyes wide behind fog spectacles. "You should be dead, man. That thing is actually working." Hartley didn't answer. He didn't trust his voice. He just flattened himself deeper, burying his helmet into the cold mud. Another whistle, another explosion. This one farther back, then another, closer again. Keller realized it first. They're bracketing us, adjusting range off the last impact. The next explosion hammered right behind their line. Dirt sprayed into the foxhole. A dead branch slammed down between Hartley and Boone, snapping in half. Boone coughed violently. "It's going to get worse before it gets better." Keller nodded grimly. "They're testing our depth. They want to collapse every hole we've dug." Hartley's unlikely insight. Between explosions, Hartley lifted his head just enough to observe the pattern. His mind wasn't on fear. It was on rhythm. 6 seconds between whistles. 3 shells in a cluster. Then 8 seconds. Then 5. Not random. Not chaotic. Coordinated batteries firing in alternating waves. He realized something chilling. "They're using staggered batteries to create overlapping arcs," Hartley yelled over the thunder. "Once all the arcs align." Keller finished for him. This ridge gets erased. A shell detonated so close that the foxhole wall collapsed inward, burying Hartley up to his elbows. He clawed desperately, freeing his arms as Boone pulled him loose by the collar. More whistles, more explosions, each one crawling closer. Boone shouted, "We need to fall back." Keller glared. "To where?" "This entire section is getting pounded." Hartley wiped mud from his helmet, fingers brushing the dent where the first fragment had hit. "The ravine," he said, his voice low but steady. Keller blinked. "What ravine?" Hartley pointed southeast through the howling snowfall. "There's a natural depression, 20 meters down slope, steep walls. If we hug the right side, the angles will absorb most of the blast energy." Boone stared in disbelief. "How do you even know that?" Hartley shrugged. "I was sketching the terrain while everyone else complained about the cold." Keller hesitated. "Moving under fire is suicide." Hartley pointed to the sky. "Staying here is guaranteed death." Another shell exploded directly behind them, blowing a shower of dirt into their faces. Keller's decision was made for him. "All right, on my mark." One at a time, low crawl, helmets tight, move to the ravine. Boone shook with adrenaline. "Hope your stupid paper helmet keeps holding." Hartley didn't smile. "It only has to hold long enough." The dash drew help. Keller motioned. "Go." The men scrambled from their foxholes, immediately swallowed by the storm of dirt and snow as shells slammed into the ridge around them. The ground shook violently with each step Hartley took. Explosions kicking up geysers of frozen mud. A fragment ricocheted off Hartley's helmet again, this one ripping a clean groove into steel. The paper underneath compressed like a sponge, stopping the shard cold. Boone saw it and shouted, "That's 3 hits. How the hell are you still standing?" Hartley ducked behind a shattered pine trunk, chest heaving. "Because paper bends," he gasped. "Steel alone does it." Another explosion lit the forest, knocking tree limbs loose. Men ran, slipped, crawled, some screaming, some silent, all desperate. Keller waved them onward. For more meters. Move. A shell detonated behind them, the concussion throwing Hartley face first into the snow. His ears rang violently. He staggered up, dizzy, mud streaking his helmet. But ahead, the ravine appeared, dark, narrow, sheltering. They dove inside as another volley landed across the ridge, flattening their abandoned foxholes with terrifying precision. Boone collapsed beside Hartley, panting. "You were right." Hartley leaned back against the cold ravine wall, helmet dented, paper layers pulped but intact. He whispered, "We're alive." Keller nodded, breath misting in the cold air. For now, the barrage isn't over. And it wasn't. They still had 5 hours to survive. But thanks to that strange, layered paper helmet, Hartley had already cheated death 3 times. And before the day was done, he would cheat it again. The ravine offered cover, but not safety. Artillery blasts rolled across the ridge like thunderclaps, shaking loose sheets of snow from branches and sending shockwaves bouncing through the frozen ground. Even here, tucked beneath a natural fold of earth, the men felt each impact vibrate through their bones. Keller pressed his back to the icy wall, wiping grit from his eyes. Listen up, this isn't shelter. It's just better than being topside. Keep your heads down and helmets tight. This barrage isn't slowing. He was right. The cadence of German guns had shifted. Faster, heavier, overlapping like a drum line of destruction. Hartley crouched low, helmet resting against the ravine wall. The paper inside was damp now. Melting snow had seeped through one of the dents. But the layers were still intact, compressed like laminated armor. Boone peeked over the edge to watch plumes erupt across the ridge. They're flattening everything. Our foxholes, our ammo dumps, even the tree. Hartley listened. He wasn't watching the blasts. He was studying the rhythm again. 3 batteries, he muttered. 1 on the left flank, 1 in the valley. Last one firing from deeper east. Keller shot him a look. You can tell that from the sound? Hartley nodded, adjusting his helmet. If they sink and fire a full volley, this ravine won't matter. Boone's voice cracked. You mean they can just erase the whole hill? All at once. Hartley didn't answer. They all knew the truth. Yes, they could. Shockwaves in the ravine. Another thunderous blast shook the ridge. Snow avalanched down the ravine wall, partially burying Boone. He coughed and clawed out, gasping as Keller dragged him free. Hartley shielded his head as debris rained down. A jagged metal fragment, hot, hissing, bounced off his helmet, slicing through the steel outer layer, but again failing to penetrate the compressed paper beneath. Keller saw it. That's the 4th one your helmet stopped. Boone shouted over the booming artillery. Well, I'll be damned. Paper armor is real. Hartley didn't laugh. It won't last forever. A new danger, tree bursts. The barrage shifted. Shells now detonating in the trees above instead of the ground. This was worse, much worse. Tree bursts sent thousands of splinters and molten fragments downward, like lethal hail. One explosion overhead showered the ravine with burning needles of steel and wood. Men screamed. Hartley ducked instinctively, his helmet ringing as multiple sharp impacts glanced off him. Keller cursed. They're trying to collapse the ravine. Boone wiped blood from his cheek. They can do that. Tree roots give way under shock, Hartley said, shaking leaves and ice from his helmet. Walls slide. Snow slabs fall. Eventually, the ground comes down with it. A deep rumble rolled through the ravine, a sound like distant thunder under the earth. Keller's face stiffened. That's exactly what they're doing. The ground begins to fail. A massive shell detonated directly above the ravine's right side. The blast cracked the earth like a bone snapping, snow and soil shifting ominously. A few meters upslope, the ground sagged. Boone pointed, panicked. Oh no, oh no. Hartley grabbed his arm. Move. The ravine wall collapsed, sending a roaring wave of snow, ice, and splintered wood crashing into the trench-like depression. Men scrambled, slipping and clawing their way clear as the collapse filled the space they'd been occupying seconds earlier. Keller dragged one soldier from the slide. Hartley pulled Boone toward a narrow outcropping where the slope dipped deeper. Breathing hard, Hartley assessed the damage. That was only a partial slide. If we stay, the next one will bury us alive. Keller nodded grimly. Then we keep moving, east, deeper along the ravine. Boone's voice wavered. Under this, with all this falling on top of us. Hartley met his eyes. If we stay, we die. If we move, we might not. Another shell detonated above. Another crack of bending timber. More snow cascading down the slope. Keller made the call. All right, go. Follow Hartley. Move from cover to cover. Stay low. The crawling gauntlet. The men moved one by one along the ravine floor, weaving around fallen logs and dodging new slides of snow. Every few steps, they froze, waiting for the next shell. Each explosion felt impossibly close. The ravine walls shook with each blast, shedding debris like a wounded beast shaking off dust. Hartley led from the front, always scanning, always anticipating the next weak point in the ground above. Boone grumbled as he crawled behind him. Of all the people to follow, the guy with the paper helmet. Hartley shot him a tired grin. Paper's holding up so far, isn't it? And then, whistle crockum, a shell detonated directly above Hartley. A thick branch split in two and fell toward him like a guillotine. Boone screamed, "Hartley, look out." The branch slammed into Hartley's helmet, denting it even deeper. But the paper layer cushioned the blow yet again, reducing what could have been a skull-splitting impact into a jarring shove that sent him sprawling. Boone slid beside him, stunned. That thing just saved you again." Keller helped Hartley to his feet. "That's 5. Hartley steadied himself, ears ringing. "Let's hope it has 6 in it." And then the barrage changed its tone. Suddenly, after nearly 40 minutes of relentless pounding, the artillery fire changed. The whistles were lower, the cadence slower, the detonations heavier. Keller froze. "Oh no, that's not the same battery." Hartley nodded grimly. "They've switched to heavy guns." Boone gulped. "They're bringing out the 150s? Hartley didn't answer. He didn't have to. The 6th impact, a deeper, throatier explosion, erupted farther up the ridge, sending a monstrous shockwave through the forest. Keller spoke the truth none of them wanted to hear. "If the heavies walk their fire onto this ravine, we won't survive." Hartley lifted his battered helmet. Paper layers crushed, but still holding. "We have to reach the eastern rocks. Natural granite. Heavies can't crack that easily." Boone stared where he pointed. A jagged line of boulders buried in drifting snow, perhaps 50 meters away. 50 meters? Boone gasped. "Under this?" Hartley nodded. "We don't make it in one sprint." Keller tightened his jaw. "Then we make it in 3. The first heavy round impact felt less like an explosion and more like the sky collapsing. A 150 millimeters German shell tore into the ridge 100 meters north, sending a shockwave rolling down the ravine with the force of a physical shove. The men staggered. Snow dust fell like ash. Boone clutched his ears. God! That wasn't artillery. That was an earthquake. Hartley steadied himself, helmet ringing from the vibration. Even the compressed paper layers had trouble absorbing the sheer concussion. Keller scanned the tree desperately. If the heavy shift fired just 30 meters south, the ravine won't hold. Hartley pointed to the granite ridge ahead. Rough, uneven stones jutting from the earth like ancient teeth. "We need to move. Now." Boone stared at the distance. "We'll never make it before the next volley." Hartley shook his head. "We don't outrun the shells. We time the gaps." The rhythm of survival. Hartley raised a hand, listening not to the explosions, but to the intervals between them. 7 seconds. 6, 8. The heavy guns fired in a different rhythm than the earlier batteries. Slower, more deliberate, but their shrapnel radius was monstrous. Dozens of meters in every direction. Keller whispered, "You can read the pattern?" Hartley nodded. "I only need 3 windows, 1 for each sprint." Boone gawked. "You're asking us to run between artillery volleys?" Hartley's voice was steady. "Yes. Sprint 1, the first gap." Hartley lifted his hand. "Get ready. When I say go, you sprint to that fallen pine. Don't stop. Don't look up." Keller steadied the men. You heard him go on his mark. The echo of the last explosion faded. Hartley counted the rhythm in his head. Wait, wait, now, move. They burst from the ravine wall, snow spraying beneath their boots. The air tasted of dust and burnt cordite. Hartley led the run, boots punching into the frozen crust of snow. Behind them, home crash. Another heavy round detonated, showering them in clods of earth. Hartley felt debris bounce off his helmet. Nothing penetrated, but every hit sent a stab of fear down his spine. They dove behind the fallen pine just as another blast rocked the ridge. Boone panted. "That's 6 hits on your helmet. How is that thing still working?" Hartley adjusted the dented steel pile. Because paper spreads force. Steel alone doesn't. Sprint 2, fragment storm. Hartley listened again. The next volley was closer. Trees shook violently. snow billowing off their branches like smoke. Hartley growled, "Get ready. When the next shell hits, go. Don't wait for me." The ground trembled. Branches snapped overhead. A massive explosion shook the valley. "Go." They sprinted again, this time toward a cluster of roots jutting from a half-collapsed hillside. The barrage intensified, shells falling in overlapping blasts. Crock 'em, whomp. A fragment the size of a knife spun toward Hartley like a thrown blade. Boone shouted. Hartley left. Too late. The fragment slammed into Hartley's helmet with a metallic chalk, slicing through the outer steel and embedding halfway into the paper laminates. The impact knocked him sideways into the snow. Keller slid beside him, hauling him up by the webbing. He's hit. Hartley blinked, dazed. He touched the paper-stuffed dent. I'm okay. Keep moving." Boone shook his head in shock. "That's 7 hits. 7. That paper helmet is doing more work than the M1 itself." Sprint 3, the last gambit. Only 30 meters remained to the granite outcropping. But the worst was coming. The next volley didn't follow the rhythm Hartley had been tracking. The Germans changed fire pattern, shifting to an overlapping grid designed to scour terrain clean. Hartley froze. Oh, no, they're doing a saturation blanket. Keller's eyes widened. That means no gaps, Hartley said. No timing windows. Boone looked around frantically. Then what the hell do we do? Hartley pointed upward, to the overhang. A jagged slab of granite jutted outward, maybe enough to shield them from fragments if they reached it fast enough. Keller assessed the distance. 20 meters. A straight run. Hartley nodded. We run the whole thing, even if shells are falling. Boone's voice cracked. That's suicide. Hartley adjusted his battered helmet, so was staying here. The final run through chaos. Hartley didn't wait for another rhythm. There wasn't one anymore. Oh, he shouted. They sprinted across open snow as the barrage reached full fury. Explosions overlapped, shockwaves throwing the men forward like ragdolls. A shell detonated behind them, a geyser of snow and mud erupting skyward. Home crash. Another hit left flank, spraying them with burning fragments. Boone screamed, "We're not going to make IT. Keep moving." Hartley roared. Another shell burst overhead. A tree burst. Shredded bark and molten steel rained on them in a deadly hail. A fist-sized chunk hammered Hartley's helmet, caving in a fresh crater, slamming his head forward so hard he tasted blood. But the paper held. Somehow it held. Keller grabbed him by the arm, dragging him the last meters. "Move, Hartley. Move." The squad dove beneath the granite overhang just as a heavy round struck the ridge above, collapsing the entire hillside in a thundering avalanche of snow and debris. Had they been seconds slower, the ridge would have buried them completely. Breathing hard, Boone stared at Hartley's mangled helmet. That's 8 hits. That helmet isn't gear, it's a miracle. Hartley leaned against the stone, catching his breath. "No," he whispered, "it's physics." For the first time in nearly 6 hours, the air no longer vibrated with constant explosions. The forest still hissed with drifting smoke, and snow still fell from branches rattled loose by concussive waves. But the thunder was moving, rolling west like a storm, beginning to lose interest in the ridge it spent half a day tearing apart. Keller pushed himself up against the granite, limbs trembling from adrenaline exhaustion. "Sound off," he rasped. His throat was raw. His voice felt like gravel. One by one, the men answered. "Boone here. Frank's here. Meissner here. Hartley here. All alive, battered, bleeding, shaken, but alive." Boone looked to Hartley with a messy mixture of awe and disbelief. "Your paper helmet, I swear that thing saved you more times today than my rifle ever saved me." Hartley touched the dented steel pot. The paper inside was crushed into a pulpy, hardened mass, almost stone-like. It had stopped 9 direct fragment impacts and absorbed 3 indirect blunt strikes. It was no longer a helmet liner. It was a survival artifact. "It did its job," he said quietly. Keller crawled toward the edge of the overhang. Peeking out toward the ridge, they had fled hours earlier. What he saw stopped him cold. The foxhole line was gone, flattened. Not a single trench remained intact. Trees were shattered into toothpicks. Snow churned into a dirty gray soup of mud and craters. Franks whispered, "God, if we stayed up there." Keller finished for him. We'd be in pieces. Hartley swallowed hard. Even he couldn't hide the shock of seeing the land where they had nearly died completely erased. Assessing the aftermath, Keller motioned the squad forward, staying under tree cover as they carefully navigated the battered terrain. Every few steps, a half-buried shell casing or crater reminded them how close they had come to annihilation. Boone hopped over a fallen log and froze. "Bodies," he whispered. Two men from another platoon, caught outside the ravine, lay partially buried in snow, helmets pierced, jackets torn by shrapnel. The barrage hadn't spared anyone caught on open ground. Franks looked away, jaw tight. They didn't stand a chance. Hartley crouched beside them, helmet in his hands. This could have been us. Keller laid a hand on his shoulder. "You kept us alive. Your idea kept us alive." Hartley shook his head. "Paper didn't stop shells. It only gave me a few extra inches of hope." Boone exhaled. "Yeah, well, those inches made the difference." A strange discovery. As they moved toward battalion lines, Keller took Hartley aside. "What made you even think of that?" he asked, pointing to the helmet. Hartley hesitated before answering. "My grandfather, he worked with timber, told me once that compressed wet paper is stronger than most people think. Used it to reinforce tool handles, pack wedges, even homemade armor during logging accidents." Keller raised an eyebrow. "That story just saved your life multiple times." Hartley tapped the mangled dome of his helmet. "It saved all of us. If I died early on, I wouldn't have led you to the ravine or the overhang or timed the gaps." Keller nodded slowly. "Never let anyone tell you thinking differently isn't worth something." Behind them, Boone shouted, "Hey, I found our line." They pushed forward, reaching friendly troops. A forward aid station sat in the woods, medics rushing between wounded men laid on tarps. Fresh troops from the 2nd Infantry Division were arriving to relieve shattered units like Hartley's. A medic stopped Keller. "What unit?" 99th Infantry, or what's left of us." The medic blinked at the sight of Hartley's helmet. "What the hell happened to that thing?" Boone answered for him. "Physics happened." Hartley managed a tired smirk. "Paper happened." The medic inspected the helmet, whistling softly. "You're lucky. That thing took multiple lethal hits. Without it, would be tagging your body right now." Keller stepped forward. "This man walked 9 lives today. Make sure command hears that." The medic nodded and scribbled notes. But it wasn't until a senior officer walked by, a colonel, that anything truly changed. He stopped dead at the sight of Hartley's helmet. "What in God's name happened to that?" Without missing a beat, Boone grinned. "He wore a paper helmet, sir, and it saved us from a 6-hour artillery barrage." The colonel blinked, stunned. "Paper?" Hartley shrugged. "Compressed, layered, dried, backed by physics." The colonel stared for a moment, then laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine amazement. "Son, that's the smartest dumb thing I've ever seen." A quiet moment of truth. Later, as the squad rested beside a heater tent, Hartley sat alone with his helmet in his lap. The steel was mangled beyond repair, caved, grooved, torn. The paper inside had hardened into a tough, resin-like mass. Boone sat beside him. "You know what this means, right? You're a legend now." Hartley shook his head. "I don't want to be a legend." Boone nudged him. "Well, tough luck, Dodge. You are." Keller approached and placed a hand on Hartley's shoulder. "You saved the squad, not with strength, not with firepower, but with ingenuity and the guts to trust something everyone else mocked." Hartley nodded quietly. It was never about being right. It was about surviving. The last sound of the day. In the distance, artillery still boomed, but now most of it came from American guns. The tide of fire had shifted. The day's storm had moved on, but one truth would follow Hartley for the rest of his life. A single bizarre idea, ridiculed by everyone around him, had become the thin, unlikely barrier between life and death. A helmet made of paper, mocked, dismissed, even laughed at, had saved an entire squad from one of the most brutal bombardments of the Ardennes. The snowfall finally began to ease, revealing the battlefield Reinhardt's immobilized panther had carved into the ridge. Flames flickered across shattered hulls. Smoke drifted low, like a wounded spirit crawling along the ground. The twisted wrecks of 4 T-34s glowed orange in the settling light, while the exploded KV. One lay torn open like a split furnace. Metal curled outward from the force of its own ammunition cooking off. The wind carried no gunfire, no engines, no shouting Soviet voices. Just silence. The terrible, heavy silence after a storm that had nearly killed them all. Inside the Panther, Weber slid to the floor, exhausted. We're out. No shells. No MG belts. Nothing. Dietrich peered through the viewport. And no infantry left to advance. They're gone. Meissner exhaled shakily, rubbing his face with numb hands. We should have died out here. Reinhardt didn't answer. He wasn't celebrating. He was studying the valley below, the approach where 5 tanks and 2 waves of infantry had come at them. His voice was quiet. Check for movement. They waited. Nothing. Not a single shadow shifted among the burning hulks. Weber finally managed a weary smile. I think we broke them, Lucas. No, Reinhardt said. We stalled them. The cold reality. The Panther is finished. Reinhardt tapped the engine temperature gauge. Dead. The battery indicator. Nearly dead. The turret traverse. Unresponsive. The Panther had given all it could. Its steel heart was gone. We can't hold this ridge, he said. Not anymore. Dietrich swallowed. So retreat on foot? Reinhardt nodded. We leave the Panther. Weber lowered his head. She saved us. Reinhardt let his gloved hand rest on the turret wall. Warm still, from the heat of battle. She bought us time. The rest is up to us. A dangerous descent. The crew gathered weapons, what little they had left, and dropped from the hull into knee-deep snow. The ridge felt eerily exposed without the Panther's armor enclosing them. Every gust of wind made them flinch. Every branch crack in the forest made them tense. Meissner whispered, the Soviets will regroup, maybe send scouts. They will, Reinhardt agreed. That's why we move fast. They started down a narrow hidden trail Reinhardt had noticed earlier. A depression formed by meltwater beneath the snow. The kind of natural cover infantry rarely checked. Behind them, the crippled Panther stood alone on the ridge, framed by smoke and fire. A monument of steel that had killed 4 tanks and broken 2 infantry attacks without moving a single meter. Dietrich looked back one last time. It's a shame that nobody will believe what happened here. Reinhardt didn't look back. They will when they see the wrecks. Unexpected encounter, friendly forces. As they neared the tree line, faint voices drifted through the forest. German voices. A patrol emerged. Half a dozen soldiers in snow capes. Rifles raised until they recognized the weary Panther crew. Unteroffizier Reinhardt, the patrol leader asked, stunned. We were sent to reinforce. We expected the ridge to be lost. Reinhardt gestured upward. It nearly was. The patrol leader stared at the burning valley, his jaw slackening as he counted the silhouettes. All that you did that with 1 Panther? Reinhardt corrected him gently. With 1 Panther. That couldn't move. The patrol leader removed his cap in disbelief. We thought the Soviets would break through in force. Your stand held them long enough for reserves to arrive. Meissner slapped Reinhardt on the shoulder. You hear that? We bought them time. Reinhardt nodded, but his expression remained solemn. Let's finish what's left. A last look at the ridge. The crew climbed onto a troop sled as the patrol prepared to transport them back to German lines. Before the sled moved, Reinhardt took one last glance at the Panther, its silhouette framed against the dawn light breaking over the battlefield. For a moment, the tank looked almost alive again, guarding the ridge, intimidating the frozen valley, still daring the enemy to come forward. Weber whispered, "She died a warrior." Reinhardt nodded slowly. "Better than most of us will." And with that, they left the ridge behind. But the story of what happened there would travel far beyond it. A crippled Panther frozen in place. For enemy tanks destroyed. Dozens of infantry halted. A Russian advance delayed long enough to change the direction of a local battle. And a crew who refused to run simply because the machine beneath them had given up. By nightfall, the forest had settled into a strange, uneasy silence. Smoke drifted in thin ribbons between shattered trees. The craters still steamed. The ravine that had sheltered the squad looked like the scar of some ancient beast. But the guns are quiet now, finally quiet. Hartley sat on an ammo crate near the aid station, his helmet resting beside him, or what was left of it. The steel pot was caved in like a kicked tin can, split in places where fragments had torn through, and the once flexible paper liner had hardened into a compressed, rock-like mass. Medics and passing soldiers stopped every few minutes to look at it, shake their heads, or mutter something like, "No way that saved a man." How many hits did this take? Paper? Paper? To every question, Hartley just offered a tired shrug. He knew the truth, and his squad knew it too. During a 6-hour artillery barrage, where dozens had died and positions were obliterated, it wasn't luck or armor or standard issue gear that kept him breathing. It was an idea everyone mocked, a strange little experiment, a paper helmet. Recognition in the aftermath. Later, as battalion leadership conducted damage assessments, Keller spoke with a major who had come forward to inspect the shattered line. When Hartley passed by, the major gestured to him that the kid with the unconventional helmet? Keller nodded. He saved us, more ways than one. If he hadn't survived those early hits, we wouldn't have made it to the ravine, wouldn't have timed the sprints, wouldn't have lived. The major approached Hartley. "You know," he said with a faint smile, "the Army spent a fortune figuring out how to keep men alive. You did it with wet paper and intuition." Hartley looked down at the ruined dome of steel and pulp. It wasn't meant to be brilliant, just better than nothing. "Sometimes," the major replied, "better than nothing is enough to change everything." He ordered the helmet collected, not as equipment, but as evidence of ingenuity under fire. It would eventually end up in a stateside museum, cataloged not as official gear, but as an artifact of battlefield necessity and human creativity. Legacy of a ridiculous idea. As winter wore on, word spread across the division. Soldiers joked less about Hartley's odd habit of tinkering. Engineers began asking him about field improvisation. Some men tried reinforcing their own liners. Nothing as extreme as his, but enough to prove he'd sparked a conversation the Army never expected. He didn't become famous. He didn't win medals. No dramatic newspaper stories or official commendations. But among those who survived that day, the truth lived on, in a world drowning in steel and fire. Sometimes the difference between life and death is a mind unwilling to accept standard issue as enough. Hartley returned home after the war, took a job in carpentry, raised a family, and never talked much about the Ardennes. But he kept one thing on his workshop wall, hanging by a single nail, his warped, dented, paper-stuffed helmet. A reminder of the day when thinking differently meant surviving the impossible. Call TO Action, US English. If this story moved you, do me a favor and hit that like button so more people can discover these forgotten cinematic moments of World War II history. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and whether anyone in your family ever served. And if you love intense documentary-style war stories brought to life, subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss the next one.